Hi, this is Elwin, founder of Genetic Insights. So congratulations, you have limitless access to every single report on Genetic Insights. You have so much insight on all kinds of topics. It's going to be immensely valuable to you. But the one question I hear from people a lot is, where do I start? And that's exactly what this video will address. I'll walk you through exactly what I would do as a new Limitless member in terms of where to start, the most important and valuable places to go, and how to approach it. Okay, so you've just downloaded the Genetic Insights Limitless collection, basically giving you access to everything that we have, which is a lot. And so the question is, I guess, where do you start? If you don't see this screen in front of you yet and you're not clear how to upload your data or how to deal with that, then we have a separate video for that to make sure you watch that first until you get to this stage. So when you first have uploaded your data or you've sent off your DNA swab and your test kit and you finally got a notification, that it takes a while usually, at least a month, often longer, but you got your notification saying, okay, your results are ready, this is what you're going to see. And so it'll start with this, sort by risk, already pressed. And so you may actually want to use this meta category more than most people. So basically this contains everything. And so there's two ways you can view it. You can either view it like this, which is sorted by risk. So it's showing your highest risk things first. And I definitely would recommend that view. Or you can turn that off and then you'll just see it in alphabetical order if you prefer to take it in like that. Now, what I would say is just because you have access to the Limitless collection, that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to like read all 300 plus reports in one go, or one after the other. And in fact, you may not even want to look at all your high risk reports straight away, because even that could be a lot. So when people say, wow, I've got limitless access and I don't know where to start, my question would be, well, what motivated you to sign up in the first place? If you are, generally interested in what genetic tendencies and risks you may have without any actual concerns related to you or any family member you may be concerned you've inherited something from, then you may actually want to start with this view. You may want to go, well, let me just pick some of my top 3, 5, 8, whatever, issues, and then download each of those. So pressing the download button usually takes, less than a minute, but certainly a few seconds. And then open each report and have a look and see what I can learn. Some of them, like this one, IL-6, which is stands for interleukin 6. It's a constituent of your immune system, which, if it's high, can mean that you have an increased tendency to inflammation. That report might be quite short, which we can show you. Whereas, something like about stress or mood swings, that actually could be pretty long. So this is to look at the things that are the highest risk to you, depending on your constitution. So if you do have a high level of stress and you feel easily overwhelmed and stuff, that may not actually be the place to start for you. You may actually want to scroll down, and this will take a little while to load more. If we had it that it loaded all of them straight away, then it would take ages for the page to load for you. So we have to do it this way, unfortunately. But you can actually scroll down until you eventually get to the point where you actually see the things that are good or optimal. And we're really seeing those, right? We're seeing lots of things where it's typical levels. So that's generally a good thing, right? Or typical sleep duration, typical likelihood. But there are actually some health issue risks where you might actually have a decreased likelihood. So if you really are feeling down or you're easily overwhelmed, then maybe rather than starting with the highest risk ones, you may want to go for, we can see them starting to appear now, the green ones, where we can be happy that we actually have less than average chance of all kinds of issues. So with this person here, so you can see there's some things that are good, like, oh, I'm less likely to have a low mood. Although earlier we did see mood swings was more likely for this particular person. So how do you interpret that? I'll probably get into that in more detail when I do a video specifically for emotional well-being. We'll get into the distinction between those kind of things. But you've got some good news here, right? Less likely to have joint pain, less likely to have attention deficit issues, less likely to have rosacea, less likely to have age spots. And so, all of that may be good news to you. Less likely to have heart health issues. That's obviously a big one. Now, of course, less likely is all we can ever say, right? This is all a estimation of risk based on your genes. Things may change in the future. And of course, all of these issues may show up despite you having these good results. Because less likely does not mean impossible, right? So it could still happen. Obviously, there's all kinds of lifestyle factors, diet factors, psychological factors, upbringing factors, all kinds of issues that could mean that you could still have these issues anyway. Just like with the list at the top there, where it talked about the highest risk, there's a very decent chance that you may not have any of those issues. That absolutely does happen all the time as well, right? Now, having said that, there are some cases where it's not impossible that you won't have it, but where it's like less and less likely. So let's see, for this person, they had their stress. Yeah, if you look at this one, like 99th percentile, which is why it was right at the top of the list. We can't always give a percentile, but when we can, we do. So what I found in my experience is this, that when a person has like a really, really high risk of developing something, by the time they get to a certain age, that certain age is usually 30s, 40s, something like that, one of two things is probably the case. And again, this is all risks and probabilities, but in my experience, probably the case. Either they have had it or have it, or they don't. But then the reason may be because they're actually doing a lot of the recommendations. And I have the great privilege, of introducing this to a lot of people who are thought leaders, who are teachers, who are medical professionals, health professionals, in various different ways, who are very accomplished and who are not just accomplished in the professional sense, but in the really looking after themselves and getting themselves to a place of peak performance sense. So I, quite often do these with people who do loads for their health and well-being. And then a lot of the time, they may not be expressing their high risk issues, but in this case, I would say, the person would not have any issue with stress if they are following probably a lot of our top recommendations. And so the way that these recommendations work is that they're often similar for different people, but the thing that's different is where the recommendations are ranked. And the ranking of the recommendations, what's first, what's second, is not arbitrary. It's absolutely weighted. So meaning the first recommendation is more important than the second recommendation, which is more important than the third recommendation, and on, right? And so sometimes there's a lot of recommendations, there's a lot of things that you could do. And so we always say, and I talk about it in the introduction, on every report, there's a 2-page introduction, which I highly recommend you read at least once, which kind of guides you through how to use these reports. And one of the things that I recommend when it comes to the recommendations is just start with your 1, 2, and 3, and then potentially go from there if it's an issue that you're really concerned with, and implement more of them. And sometimes it's easy. In this case, it's certainly not always the case. There are many genetic reports that don't mention any supplement ingredients, but this one happens to do so. But this one's still saying that therapy is the most effective thing for this person's genes for stress. But they do recommend some, purple passion flower, which is a supplement, or herbal tea, a massage for this person. And it's showing why in this case, right? It's saying massage can help stimulate oxytocin, which this person has a variant of that may make them have more of an issue with. And you can see with every recommendation that it's got an impact score and an evidence score. And so the impact means that, based on the science, based on the studies, based on the research, how effective is it? How much will it make a difference? And then the evidence is just how many papers are there, how many research studies are there. And so generally, the top recommendations, like in this case, psychotherapy, it gets a high rating for both of those. And generally, though of course it varies per person, because as I said, these recommendations are always different depending on the person. But then we start to get the, recommendations that perhaps are not as impactful and don't have as much evidence. But, for instance, like in this case, the valerian, the L-theanine, and the purple fustian flower, you may as well know all of those, because that may well be something that, you can get all together in one capsule or even one tea blend, Now, this is yet another type of report, what we call a types report. And so this is a case where it's not really about good or bad, high or low risk, more or less need, and it's just about what type you are. So as you can see, we always do, the explanation to begin with about how the whole reports work, so that when you share them with people, they, understand the proper context. And also if you review them after not seeing them for a while, you know what's going on. But in this case, in fact, worse response to carbs. But I call this a type 1 because even though it's a bad response to carbs, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just, I guess it's bad if you love carbs, but as it explains here, it's more about which variant you have as to how you respond to carbs. And so this person is more of a hunter-gatherer variant, which basically means they don't handle carbs very well. But the person with that has a higher than average tendency to be able to handle proteins and fats better, because that's more what they're evolutionarily adapted to. So to me, that's not really a case of what's right and what's wrong. That's just a case of what you have a tendency towards. And in that case, there's no recommendations, because the only recommendation is to try following the diet that matches your genetic type, which for this person would be to eat less carbohydrates. One more type that we'll just look at is the nutrient need type. And so for this person, they had increased need for vitamin D. And so, explain a bit about it, the different types, and then we get to it. So you have an increased need. In this case, we don't give a percentage because we're not able to, but we do give you all of the, SNPs, the genetic variants that may have led to your increased need for vitamin D. It also explains here, this is important to check, around 20 to 40% of the difference in people's vitamin D levels may be due to genetics. So what that means is this is not like your genetics are not necessarily the biggest factor, but it is a factor. So it's something to pay attention to, that all other things being equal, same amount of sun exposure, same skin pigment, etc., you would need more than that other very similar person because of genetic reasons. And so, in this case, the only recommendations are vitamin D and some of the foods which have been shown to contain some level of vitamin D, although there really isn't that much in food. It's, sunlight and supplementation is usually what's necessary if you do have that increased need, but we do give you some examples of where you can get it. So that's the other type of report. So when we're talking about having limitless insights, that's really what we mean. And we can see you have access to over 300 reports, and all of them have got, a lot of information, a lot of recommendations. And so how do you approach it? Giving you a couple of examples how to do it so far. Another one, of course, is just to focus on why you signed up in the first place, because most people don't do it out of pure curiosity with no concerns or something on their mind. And so if you do have a concern or something for your mind, there should be a category for it, right? Whether it's you just want to see, there's anything getting in the way of you living as long as possible, or blood sugar issues. Maybe someone in your family has them. You're wondering if they've passed it on to you. That may be true for cardiovascular health. Maybe you're struggling with digestion. Maybe it's more of an issue of stress, like we talked about earlier. And so the other thing to do would be really to dig into each of these categories and then evaluate that category. Now, I won't give an example of that in this video because we'll have videos on every single one of these categories and how to navigate it for that reason. So that may be the other thing. Just because you have access to all of them doesn't mean you necessarily want to get into all of them. And if you mainly sign up because you have digestive issues or because you have sleep issues or whatever it might be, I would recommend watch that video about how to best navigate that collection if you want some help, or otherwise just literally, skip to the category and start reading. And, whereas with the all access, there's so many reports that may feel overwhelming. In the case of the sleep category, as you can see with this one, there's 14. So it's not necessarily too much. And then if we sort it by risk, we can see, there's only potentially 3 things that are in the high risk, which I'll just say because it's simple, right? In this case, maybe if you have a high tendency for stress, that's going to affect your sleep. If you have a tendency to fall asleep during the day or want to, then that could affect your sleep. And of course, that is a type of sleep. And then, if you have an increased need for tryptophan, which is the basic building block of melatonin, which is the hormone and neurotransmitter that tells your body it's time to sleep, then that could cause an issue, right? And so it's giving you a clue there, do you see, if you have a sleep issue as to what may be going on. And, it's like a first step of something to investigate. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, make sure to visit our Genetic Insights Facebook group, if that's an option for you, to connect with me and other like-minded people. Otherwise, of course, you can always reply to any of our emails and email us, and we'll be happy to help.